Greetings, you curiouser and curiouser Herle Burly-ites. We'll get right to it today because we've got a member of parliament today on the pod and an issue that's not only central in the public consciousness, but urgent in terms of policy making, playing an outsized role, certainly in our last election. Scott Aitchison, conservative critic for housing, diversity and inclusion, joins us. Scott's from Huntsville, Ontario, and he's contributed to public life since the age of 21, when he was first elected to town council. After serving as town councillor, district councillor, and deputy mayor, he was elected mayor in 2014. After 5 years in that job, leading by building consensus, Scott ran successfully to represent Parry Sound Muskoka in the House, on the promise to shake up partisan gridlock in Parliament and stand for the best interests of every Canadian. So today, a conversation on what matters to so many Canadians, a place to call home, affordability, policy to help them get there. But I also want to broaden the aperture and talk party politics, the election just passed, and get Scott's take on the early moves of the Carney government. So Scott, been wanting to have you on this pod for such a long time. Thanks for reaching out to do this. Love it when you do that, and it's fantastic to have you on the show.
Well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, honored. You'll change your mind when this is over, I'm sure. Listen, what is it like in Ontario's beautiful cottage country today? Is it a beautiful summer day for you?
Well, today it's actually raining a little bit today, which is somewhat of a relief. It's been oppressively hot for the last few days, and so I think people are enjoying the slight relief that we've got from a little bit of rain. I think it's supposed to clear up though. It's been gorgeous summer so far.
Right. And you've lived there your whole life.
Sort of. I always been here. I lived in Toronto for a little bit while I worked with the Enterprise Canada group for a little bit there. But I'm from the area for sure. My family arrived in 1871 with one of those 200-acre free land grants, so we've been here a long time.
Holy, right, and continuously on that land?
No, the land's been chopped up and sold off now. So.
Right. Let's learn a little bit about you and your background. And obviously, one of the fascinating things about you is I got involved in politics at a young age, but not publicly elected politics. I got involved in backroom party politics. But you went out there and started getting elected for public office at a very young age. What was motivating you at that point to do that?
I always tell people that the truth of it is that you don't get into elected politics unless you have a certain amount of ego, and I certainly did when I was 21. I liked the idea of seeing my name in the local newspaper, but I was passionate about my community, and having grown up in a Jehovah's Witness home where we weren't supposed to be interested in politics. I left home at the ripe old age of 15 because I was stubborn, if nothing else. I wasn't thinking I would run in this particular election, but a former mayor and a mentor of mine who had been the principal of the high school while I was the president of Students' Council suggested I should run because I probably wouldn't win. And when I was done school, I could come back and everyone would know who I am and I could, then run and win. And so I thought, well, Terry Clark, my mentor, tells me I should run. I guess I'll do it. So I think we spent a grand total of $700 in that campaign. I just went out and did my thing, and I won by the skin of my teeth. I think I won by about 32 votes or something like that. But it fairly quickly changed the trajectory of my world and sort of surprised all of us, I guess, a little bit.
Right, no kidding. Hey, let's go back to something you said. You left home when you were 15?
I did. Yeah.
Where'd you go, and why'd you leave?
Well, I left because I felt quite profoundly that my parents didn't have the one and only true belief system on the planet, and that I should be permitted to explore other belief systems. And my argument with my father was that surely if I go do that research, I'll come to the same conclusion you have. He didn't buy that argument, and so we were battling quite a bit. It was a tough time actually, but finally one day my dad said to me, "Listen, can we at least agree that while you live in my house, you need to live by my rules?" And I thought, that's fair, Dad. I agree with that, and so I'll leave. And he thought I was bluffing, but I left, and I mean, we have a great relationship now. I mean, it took a bit of time, but I was quite determined to chart my path the way that I thought was best, and so I did.
Did that mean that you had to start earning some money at 15, or were you still in school?
I was still in school and I earned a little bit of money. I had a part-time job, but I was incredibly lucky that like a family that I knew their sons pretty well. They insisted that I come and stay with them because I needed to be with a family.
Yeah.
And so I still call them, they're still my family, and all their kids call me Uncle Scott and all that stuff. So I've been incredibly blessed for a guy that left home pretty young, under not the best circumstances. I have multiple families now, and so I consider myself pretty lucky.
Right. Okay. Let's flash forward. In 2019, you decided to no longer be the mayor and you decided to run for parliament. Have I got that right?
That's correct.
Right. So, why would you do that? And what's the difference between being the mayor of Huntsville and being the member of parliament for Huntsville?
Well, one of the reasons I decided to take the plunge was because of housing. Housing in my region, our region, particularly in Huntsville and Bracebridge, the other larger community in our area. Housing's been in a crisis state here for more than a decade. Vacancy rates and rentals have been under 1% in Huntsville for a lot longer than we've been talking about this issue nationally. And we had done a lot of things locally. As the mayor, it was one of my top two priorities, that and saving our hospital. We gave land away to Habitat for Humanity. We did deals with private sector developers with free land. We would waive development charges. We did things like, you know, postpone collection of charges until after the project was done, so the developer didn't have to borrow that money to pay that. We did all kinds of things, and it still wasn't quite enough to really change the situation. It moved the needle a bit, but it we needed more. And so it was one of those issues that I thought, I think that there's real potential to do something at the national level. Because I was very frustrated by, at the time, this national housing strategy that Prime Minister Trudeau had announced with great fanfare. You remember it, I'm sure.
I do.
In 2017, he stood in front of a construction project and called it life-changing, national housing program, that it was going to be huge. Um, and from what I could observe as a mayor of a small town in rural Ontario, it looked more like a vote buying scheme in the big cities because the money was going places like that. And they completely ignored rural Canada. And that frustrated me. And I thought, it's not so much about federal money, it's about reducing the burden to get more built. And I thought maybe I can have an impact at the federal level.
Okay. Well, I guess we're into it now. So
Yeah.
let's do it. Let's do talk housing. And it's interesting you say that. No, you're an expert and I'm a layperson, so this will be the dynamic as we go back and forth. But what I hear is that almost all of the tools and all of the problems are at the municipal level. Development charges, zoning, various things. And so, the feds are really trying to influence municipal decisions with their money. And I think that's kind of the conservative policy too. We're going to use the federal stick to influence local decision making. But you were at the local level and decided you didn't have the tools.
Yeah, I didn't have all the tools I needed because, of course, there's a lot of reasons for that. With not including not least of which the fact there's a two-tier system of municipal government in Muskoka, and I had to deal with a regional government as well. But 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 the points you just made are sort of true. Uh,
That's the case with so much of what I
yeah,
say.
no, no. But you make good points, and I think that the crux of this issue is at the local level. It has gotten outrageously slow and expensive at the local level to get permission to build a home, and that really is the crux of it. But there's not housing is not just about local approvals. It's about macroeconomics as well. This is very simple math. I understand the math. That's how simple it is. Your input, it costs so much to build and operate, and you have to generate so much rent or profit from the sale of a place to make it work. Right? If your input costs are way too high, then your sale price or your rental price has to be high, and people can't afford that. And so right now we have a situation in this country where um, for a long time, the macroeconomics were that money was almost free. And so builders were building lots of places that were way bigger than we used to build when the housing crisis last reared its head after the war. You think about those wartime homes, houses, they were small, by comparison to today's homes. And so that, we address the situation very differently back then than we do now. The other change
Can I
today,
stop? Can I stop you? Because I find it so interesting. And I
yeah,
really don't know the answer to this question. It makes me feel generationally old and entitled and all kinds of things. Do you think if we built a bunch of 1,500 square foot homes that people would buy them?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely would. But here's the crux of the differences, right? I mean, the macroeconomics have to work, and so interest rates have to work, and the cost to borrow money, generally speaking, has to work in this context. But what was different back then, right after the war, when they created CMHC and they built all kinds of homes, they didn't have to go through 6 years of planning approvals to get permission to put shovels in the ground, and they didn't have to pay huge development charges. They didn't have to pay all kinds of planning application fees. It was a much faster process. Well, they literally got things built a lot faster. So I agree that the federal government should use its federal spending powers as leverage to get municipalities to do what we need them to do, and in some cases maybe to help offset some of their costs related to growth. But that's not what's happening.
Right.
I mean, they call this Housing Accelerator Fund. They say that this is designed to help speed up the approvals process. Well, some municipalities didn't get money because they didn't meet the ideological test of fourplexes everywhere, for example. That's not a silver bullet, by the way. But it's a good idea. But if you have another plan as a city that says, yeah, we're not going to approve fourplexes everywhere, but we're going to do this and upzone that and make sure we have more density here and more density there, and it meets your target or exceeds the target, then why wouldn't they get approved? Windsor didn't get approved for that reason. City of Red Deer had a plan that would actually produce hundreds more units than what the Housing Accelerator Fund. They didn't get approved, and yet we have Toronto. They got $471 million. Part of what they agreed to do was to permit sixplexes as of right everywhere in the city.
Yeah.
They got a deal done on 9 wards. And yet there's no talk of them losing any of their housing accelerator funding, and they didn't even meet their agreement. So I say all of this because if the goal is to use federal spending power to change municipal behavior, then they're not doing it, and they never have.
So, a question. Can something display qualities of sincerity and insincerity at the same time? Contradiction, duplicitousness, and a double standard at the very heart of it. The following story says that it can. I've been talking here about how our presenting sponsor TELUS's competition have been trying to restrict TELUS from offering wholesale fiber internet services in Ontario and Quebec, going so far as to formally petition Cabinet to overturn a thoroughly reviewed CRTC decision that had allowed it, based on proven consumer benefits. Last week I told you about Cogeco. This week it's Bell. Now get this. Post the CRTC decision, Bell has been aggressively trying to stop other providers from getting wholesale access to their fiber networks in Canada, actively lobbying against it, threatening to hold back investment if they don't get their way. Their very loud argument? Allowing wholesale access undermines the economics, the whole business case, for fiber deployment. Yet, just 8 short months ago, Bell publicly announced a $5 billion deal to acquire a company called Ziply Fiber, an internet provider in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. Ziply's business model explicitly includes the wholesaling of fiber services. Ding, 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 double standard alert. If Bell doesn't believe in the economics of wholesale fiber access, why did they just spend $5 billion big ones in the U.S. to acquire a company that actively promotes, packages, and profits from wholesaling fiber services? And friends, it's here I take you back to the question I asked at the top of this piece. Can something be sincere and insincere at the same time? Bell has been frighteningly sincere in its ongoing efforts to prevent real competition here in Canada, but blatantly insincere about why they're doing it. You can't profess disbelief in the wholesale fiber business case when you've just bought one for $5 billion in another country yet. Cabinet, are you listening? I'll underline how Canadian customers stand to lose from all of this next week. Okay, so I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself because let's go back. There's two aspects to this, and I want to be clear about what we're talking about. Right now, we're talking about not affordable housing for indigent people who need housing, really affordable, low income housing. We're talking about the young middle class couple with a couple of kids that is trying to get into the housing market and is priced out. Right?
Right.
That's who we're talking
Yep.
about right
That's the
now.
market. Yep.
That's the market right now. Okay, so um, Carney had a big plan about this in the election. I would say, other than Canada, US, this was the thing that he was most expansive about in the election campaign, and seemed to be a policy that had been thought about for a while. It had components to it. It had a government agency to build for the really for the low income housing. It had this deal where you're talking about to buy down development charges in the local communities, and it had this plan to buy modular homes so that we could do all this at speed, which is kind of important because we're falling further behind by hundreds of thousands of homes a year,
Yep.
right? So that's the Carney plan, as I understand it. What's wrong with it?
Well, like you said on the last episode of the Hurley Really with the Chiefs, they're not talking about it now. Nothing's happening. In case you haven't noticed, the crisis started some time ago. Actually, it's not coming. It
Right.
started a while ago. And so the fact that we spent 4 weeks in Parliament racing through legislation to permit them to do waive the GST on on for first time home buyers on new homes. I mean, but people still aren't have access to that tool. There's all kinds of things that they talked about doing, but they're waiting until the fall for the regulations. Well, the crisis is now. So that's the
Right.
first issue. While we're crisscrossing the country talking to premiers, which is important, I think it's important you got to walk and chew gum at the same time. This is foundational to our economy, housing, as much as pipelines and mines are. I think housing is an absolute foundation to our economy, and so I think you got to be able to do both. The other issue I have with it, frankly, and it comes down to this, you know, Canada builds homes or homes
Mm.
build Canada homes thing. I don't I it is I am just completely perplexed as to why they would want to build what is a third federal housing agency. So we have the CMHC. It's an insurance company, and they they were given the job of delivering the national housing strategy. Not
Right.
really prepared for it at the time, but that's what they've
Mm.
been doing. But we also have Canada Lands Company. So Canada Lands Company was created after the Mulroney government spun off CN and created a private company, and they thought, well, we better keep these high profile things like the CN Tower, the Port of Montreal, for example, and the Science Center, and manage those. Well, since then they've become quite a significant developer. Downsview Park in Toronto. There's a number of projects in Ottawa. They've got projects in Calgary and Montreal. They've done stuff all over the country. They're really good at it. In fact, they also turn over a little profit to the federal government. So I don't know why you would create out of thin air more bureaucracy in Ottawa to do precisely what your crown corporation already does pretty effectively. And frankly, the Crown Corporation, Canada Lands Company, they face the same challenges that any private developer does, and that is that it takes too long to get approval at City Hall. It's outrageously expensive. And of course, in Ottawa, they have City Hall plus the National Capital Commission to go through. And frankly, the other issue they have is that if you want to use federal lands that are underutilized to build new homes, it takes up to 10 years for the federal government to say, yeah, we don't need that land. And so I don't know why they want to build a whole new agency, which I'm sure you understand, David, better than anybody. It takes money and time to build a federal bureaucracy. And in a time when they keep talking about wanting to reduce the cost of spending in government, I don't know why they wouldn't clear the path for private sector developers, incent them with cash in some cases to build what we want them to build mixed communities, and to actually clear the path to get more land available faster with organizations like Canada Lands Company. Stefan Derry is the man who now runs Canada Lands. He used to work in procurement. I actually asked him, I said, During the election campaign, Pierre Poilievre was talking about making 15% of federal buildings and properties available right away to get building on. And I asked him, I said, is that realistic? You worked in the bureaucracy. You worked in the department that disposed of federal lands. Could we identify that many properties that quickly? And his response was immediate. He said, absolutely. It's absolutely doable. So I don't know why we just don't use the tools we have and just get building.
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, but I might hypothesize that it has something to do with modular homes. Because I've talked to a number of people in the residential development business who are skeptical of modular homes,
Yeah.
but do agree that if ordered in quantity, if done at scale, significantly reduces price. Not if not done at scale, but if done at a certain scale. So is that perhaps the reason for this new agency is to actually be ordered? Like, I mean, who's going to order 25,000 homes besides a government agency?
Yeah, in fact, I'm glad you raised that because I listened to, the Chiefs podcast and that was brought up. The fact of the matter is there are lots of really big builders in this country that can operate at that scale and have operated at that scale. Peter Gilgan, who owns Mattamy Homes, isn't investing in a factory to build more homes because he's hopeful the government's going to buy them from him. He's doing it because he builds subdivisions and thousands of homes at a time, and he sees the opportunity here. Great Gulf Homes has a factory. Kaivan Homes in the Ottawa area.
So
Frank Cairo.
you like modular, you just don't think it needs an agency.
I don't think you need the federal government to be buying. I think modular is absolutely, it's not new either. This is a tool we employed right after the war to build millions of homes all across North America. The factory built home is a great thing, and in fact, they can do it with panelization. They can build that missing middle density as well. It's a great tool. The problem we have with modular, and the reason we're not building faster with modular is because you still have to have a place to put those homes. And that remains the problem. You got to get approvals in place faster and cheaper to put those homes somewhere. So that's not the challenge. Now, the federal government I know is engaged in getting back into the business of building homes for service men and women on base. That's a great idea. And modular is a great way to do that because you have the
The
land.
commander of the Navy told me that they generally live in rather modest
I listened to that
circumstances.
pod as well, and it's shocking to think that we house the young men and women who protect our country and defend us in such substandard conditions. Here's the added benefit, though, of not just taking better care of our servicemen and women, but if you build a new home on base, then you free up a unit in the town next to that base as well. It has a double impact, right? And so the federal government can certainly be engaged in purchasing modular at scale for our bases all across the country. That's a great idea. But I honestly, I don't really believe that a federal agency using modular is necessary to get more homes built faster. And I think, all you have to do is look at the example of what they tried to do in New Zealand with Kiwi Build. I mean, they did the exact same thing. Over 10 years, they were going to build 100,000 units, and they built like 2,300, and they wound it down. They're like, yeah, that was a mistake. I honestly, the builders can build fast. They can build super fast. We just need to get out of their way.
Well, okay, so let me just challenge that because that is kind of the crux of what I heard Mr. Poilievre saying about housing during the election campaign, which is we need to get rid of the impediments to building and the building will happen, right? How does that how does that jive with people who tell me that we don't have nearly enough builders? We just don't have nearly enough tradespeople in the country to build the number of houses that we need to have built. If everything was going at top speed, we just don't have the people. How about the fact that at least in Vancouver and Toronto, most of the development companies are buried in a morass of condos they can't sell now and have all kinds of sunk costs all over the place. Are they really going to be able to have the resources to wheel and build more residential housing right now? I mean, to me, it doesn't look like a problem that if we just got out of the way, it would solve itself. It just feels like there's too many moving parts for that.
Yeah, and I'll grant you that it's not just about getting out of the way. I would agree with you. I think it's important to to clear the path and make it easier to get permission to build. I think it's also important for governments at all levels to specifically incent what they're looking for. I'll give you an example. There are programs that exist today in Muskoka, for example, where we know we want more affordable rentals as defined by CMHC. And so there's a program where we'll give $100,000 per unit to make the numbers work, but you have to sign an agreement for 25 years that the unit will stay at that affordable rental rate for 25 years. So those
Oh,
kinds of programs are great incentives to get things built. Free land helps make the numbers work as well. But the glut of condos in our market right now, particularly in the GTA, and the situation right now is again, it's a symptom or a result of bad policy decisions in the late 70s when we stopped the MERB program, this incentive program to build more rentals.
yeah,
The Trudeau government of the day said, "Oh, we're making landlords rich, and so the federal government should get into the business of building homes," which they promptly stopped doing when they realized they had no money left. And so then nobody was building rentals, but those builders wanted to build something, and so then it became a great investment tool for people to buy these postage stamp condos and rent them out. Well, then all of a sudden the macroeconomics don't work for it, and there's all these condos that nobody wants to buy anymore because the numbers don't work. So this is the implication of policy decisions 50 years ago that are coming home to roost now. And so, again, the federal government getting into this business, I don't think will work. I don't think it's necessary. I think that if we clear the path, make it easier to get permissions to build, make sure the macroeconomics work. There are great programs that the CMHC has for the construction of apartments. They used to be called the RCFI, now it's called the ACLP, the Apartment Construction Loan Program.
yeah,
There are builders that build rentals that would love to build more rentals, but they can't make the math work because the money costs too much. ACLP offers loans at a much better rate. So this is the federal government not spending money, but loaning money at a very small rate, the same rate that they would get on government bonds, but the program is used up. So I don't understand why you would spend money to build some new agency when if you added more money to this program and loaned it out and got the money back, you'd get more units built and you'd get them built faster.
right. What would you do about all the NIMBYs like me who already have a place in downtown Toronto? It's appreciated in value. I want to preserve that. Um, and I'm not interested in changing the complexion of my neighborhood and etc. Like, what do you do about people like me? Do I
Yeah,
have a, do I actually, in this circumstance, do I have a right to be that person?
well, I guess you have the right to be whoever you want to be. I'll tell you what I did when before I was the mayor, I was on the Planning and Economic Development Committee here. And I mean, don't get me wrong, we're not talking about 40-story towers in Huntsville, obviously, but we are talking about, communities that don't like change. We're talking about waterfront property owners who have got their piece of heaven and don't want anybody else to come in. So some pretty vested interests. Here's what I would always do. I would always engage with people about what their concerns are. I think it's human nature to not like change. It's probably the most constant thing in our lives, and it's the thing we resist the most.
As you get older, it
And
becomes
as you get
worse.
older, absolutely. And these are the people that have more time to go to planning committee meetings and complain about things. But I would always engage those folks and challenge their assumptions. And talk about, what really matters to you here. People would talk about, oh, there's going to be so many more cars. In the context of Huntsville, that's a ridiculous comment. Um, and so I think that what we need to do, frankly, is more planning and less processing. And I'll unpackage that a bit. Municipalities all across, Canada, they use a very similar planning system. We have official community plans or official plans that say this is what we want to look like in 10 years from now. And then they have a zoning bylaw that enforces that. And, you go through this process of rezoning property, and there's a public meeting process that's part of that, and the neighbors get notified. What I would say is that we need to back up that process and start planning our municipalities with some density provisions. So this concept of permitting fourplexes or sixplexes as of right, what that means is if you want to do a sixplex on this piece of property that has a single family detached home, you no longer need to go to a public meeting to get approval to do that. You can just do it. And so what I would say is with your official community plans, let's designate areas within cities to say this is where the high density should be. This is where the medium density should be. This is where the low density should remain. And if somebody comes along with a proposal for a high density building in a zone that's recognized as high density, then there's no need for a public meeting because you had your public meetings when you planned out your city. So more planning up front, less processing of applications. This will speed up the process. It won't make everybody happy, but as you know, in public life, it's not about making everybody happy, but it's about doing the right thing.
Okay, so apropos of absolutely nothing at all, but the fact that it's July, here from the folks at CN who sponsor this pod is the railroad version of some beach reading. Just some interesting stuff. Railways have places called hump yards. Want to know what a hump yard is? A hump yard uses gravity to sort rail cars. Gravity is a pretty powerful tool. An arriving train is pushed over an artificial hill, the hump. Then its cars are decoupled and allowed to coast down onto one of several tracks, controlled precisely into place by a braking system. It saves tons of work. Now you know. It's especially effective on hump day. That was a joke. I was joking. Okay, so bridges. Canada has a lot of rivers and canyons and gorges, so CN has a lot of bridges. 7,250 bridges. That's 315 kilometers of bridging, or 195 miles. That's like Kingston to Toronto, all on bridges, or Calgary to Edmonton. A staggering amount of spans and steel beams and track. And tunnels. CN has tunnels, more than 80 of them. And that's only counting the ones that are more than 135 feet long. Some are underwater. Some pass through mountains. Because, sometimes the best way around obstacles is right through them. And CN has its own police force. They're there to keep trains and the public safe, usually meaning apart. Over the decades, 350 CN officers have been awarded medals of distinction by the Governor General. I could go on. Rolling refrigerator cars, specially decorated locomotives, fire cars operating out of the wilderness by courageous CN firefighting teams. This might be the silly season, but CN railroaders are doing the serious work. Every day, count on it.
So in dealing with municipalities, Scott, the one thing I don't quite understand about the conservative policy on this is I know that the liberal policy, as started by Sean Fraser and carried on by Carney, is to buy the cooperation of the municipalities, is to give them more money than they otherwise get if they do what you want them to do, right? Which is, we can go back to section 95,
Roughly
96.
speaking, yes, that's
Yeah,
what
roughly.
they do.
Okay. But the Poilievre policy was the reverse of that, was a stick. It was not you'll get more if you do the right thing. It's you'll get less if you don't do the right thing. Same objective, but a different approach to municipalities. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. And so how would that work? Tell me how that would work how would that have worked with Olivia Chow and sixplexes?
Yeah, well, I think the evidence is pretty obvious. I mean, when you use too much carrot, you don't get the results. I mean, look what's happening.
Mm.
Look what's happening. I mean, I think we need a little more stick than carrot right now because we've been using carrots for a long time and it's not working. It's not working. And in fact, it's becoming embarrassing, frankly. When you look at, the city of Toronto, they have flouted their own agreement. This is the council agreed and approved and adopted their application to the Housing Accelerator Fund, which included sixplexes as of right all across the city. They voted on this. They voted in favor of this. They set it in. They got their agreement, $471 million. Now they've reneged on it, and it doesn't matter. So how's the carrot working? It's not.
What's the importance of home ownership in a society, Scott? Why do we care whether people are owning or renting or whatever?
Well, I'll back by saying this. Housing is a continuum, right? I mean, you don't leave your parents' house and buy your first house right away, usually, right? There's a progression of, you get into the market, you get an apartment, you buy your first place, and maybe you have a family, you need a bigger place, and then you want to downsize. The idea is to be able to move through that continuum smoothly. And of course, you need a healthy market in all parts of it for that to work. But I think back, I think back to my own perspectives on how I approached the development approvals process as a municipal councillor. You think about how our country was founded, the early settlers. So many of them, like my family, they came here from Scotland because the idea of owning any land was a complete fantasy there. But the idea of owning your own land and having your own land to farm and to raise your family on was something that was only for the uber rich. And so in many ways, our entire society is founded on the notion of your home is your castle. And we've also over decades and certainly the last several decades created policies that mean we use our homes as part of the tool to fund our retirement. We've got policies in place that protect your investment in that asset so that you can help fund your own retirement. And so we've geared our whole system to the concept of owning a home, and the pride of ownership, but also the security of that home ownership as you go through life and get towards the end of life. So it's really from the very founding of our country been foundational to how we live our lives.
Yeah. Do you think an ownership society has a different mentality than a renting society?
Yeah, I think it probably does a little bit. Stephen Harper wrote a book, and I can't remember what it's called even now, but he referred to people that sort of called the somewheres versus the anywheres, and he was sort of trying to paint this picture of people who live in smaller rural communities tend to be a little more connected, and their sense of place matters more than anything else, and versus maybe younger people that live in cities that don't mind renting and kind of want to be able to just go wherever and not really put down roots. And I think that oftentimes renters are seen as the folks that aren't necessarily sure they're going to put down their roots and stay here. They might move around, right? And I think it's important for them to be able to have that option. But I think it's also important for people that want to put down roots and be a part of a community to have that option too. And right now, that's a lot tougher than it ever has been.
Right. So let's just flip for a minute, if we could, to the other end of the market, the bottom end of the market, where people just can't afford anything.
Yeah.
And it's not a question that houses are a couple $100,000 too expensive. They're just not in the cards.
Yeah.
So, what do you have for that? What do you have for those people? And is this issue related to the tent cities that are now all over all of our major cities? As both a moral and a practical tragedy, in my view. But
yeah, I agree with you 100%. And yes, it is connected, and there's a lots we can unpack on this as well. And again, this is all connected to to the amount of public investment in social and supportive housing that's been in decline for decades. I would say that of our entire housing market, probably just under 3%, around 2.5% is social and supportive housing. It probably should be at least double that. And so we need more investment. Again, one of the reasons why I don't know why we'd be, creating new bureaucracies when that money could be much better spent, investing in that segment of the market, that segment of the housing spectrum that the private sector simply cannot and will never do. So I think we need real investment there, in partnership with provincial governments and municipal governments. There's no question too that in particular in the larger centers where most Canadians arrive, when they come here, new Canadians arrive, immigration numbers have been challenging. We've had a very managed system for many decades, and we kind of let control of that just go out the wayside. And you see an awful lot of refugee families staying in homeless shelters, and that makes no sense at all, right? And so there's been a lack of planning in housing policy, but also a lack of planning in immigration policy, and so the two have combined to create the crisis that you see today. So we need to bring some semblance of sanity back to immigration numbers. We need to bring investment up in that social and supportive housing, and I think the days of us just ignoring housing policy when it comes to the homeless, particularly. I think that we need to be working more closely with cities and not just hoping that cities are going to solve the problem on their own, because they're not.
Um, yeah. Um, so, how does government work, Scott? Strange question for the two of us to ask each other at this point, but like social housing, the federal role in social housing was, I think, part of the cuts that Mulrooney was making through the 80s, trying to get the deficit under control. And then I think Martin finished off the federal role in social housing in the 94 or 95 budget. So that is 30 years ago,
Yeah.
right? Does anybody check in and say, how's that going? Like we used to build a lot of social housing and then we just stopped. Um, how's that going? Or do we just like 30 years later wake up and go, holy fuck, people are living in the park. How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of points I'd make there, not the least of which is the fact that I think that the cuts of the Mulroney, Chrétien, Martin era are a testament to what happens when you overspend for decades and don't have a way to pay for all these things. I remember those days as a municipal leader in Muskoka, and the cuts at the Martin era. They got downloaded, and the provinces downloaded stuff. I mean, it all trickled down.
Yeah.
And so I would say that speaks to the importance of making sure our fiscal policy at the provincial and federal level makes sense, and we're not overspending. But I the federal people like to tell me on social media all the time to shut my mouth because housing is provincial or housing is municipal. The fact of the matter is we are all involved in housing at all levels of government, and we're all involved. And this is part of the challenge we face in this country, is that we all need to be heading the same direction on this file, right? You can't have the federal government waive the GST on the construction of new rentals, only to have the municipalities raise their development charges the same amount. This is another thing that the city of Toronto did. They got their deal done on the Housing Accelerator Fund and then raised development charges 40%. So we all have to be going the same direction on this file. That that I think requires the convening power of a prime minister who understands the importance of making sure that we are all headed the same direction on housing policy because it is so foundational to our economy. Prime Minister Carney is playing that role right now on major projects, on infrastructure, on things like mines and pipelines, and having those conversations. But housing has to be part of that conversation as well.
All right. Speaking of prime ministers, why isn't Pierre Poilievre the prime minister?
Yeah, well, I think that the reasons for that have been hashed and rehashed over and over again. I think the implications of Donald Trump and his ridiculous commentary didn't help. I think that I think that if I was going to be really honest about this, I think part of the problem that we had is that there's a segment of the population that were uncomfortable with Pierre and his tone, and I would say that those people, generally speaking, probably watch the traditional media a little more than maybe YouTube videos. And I would say that as a party that we weren't engaged with traditional media and speaking to that demographic of voter, and I think that ultimately that hurt us.
Right. That wouldn't have surprised you, would it, though? Because you actually ran for the leadership on a platform of bringing a different tone and of bringing a different approach to politics. And you have a different way of engaging in politics. So, um, is this a lesson that is going to be learned, or are we going to run back the same thing?
Yeah, I think so. Listen, I'll tell you one thing about Pierre. He is one of the hardest working, smartest, most engaged guy when it comes to this stuff. He's
Mm.
always learning. I think that in our conversations, he's been nothing but great with me. Even right after the leadership race, right? I mean, he won that with such huge numbers, and I came dead last. And he insisted upon speaking to me first. He said, "Listen, I need you involved. I want you on housing. You're great on this." And he really has been amazing to work with. He's actually an incredibly likable guy, even though maybe some Canadians don't think he's very likable. I think he can adjust his approach and his tone. He can use his team a little differently this time around. I don't know what he will do, but I have all the faith in the world that he's a smart enough guy to make the adjustments he needs to make, because when it comes to policy, his policy prescriptions were pretty bang on, especially when you see how many of his policies prescriptions Mr. Carney is using now.
Yeah.
In many ways, I hear my colleagues say, "Ah, they're stealing our ideas." And I'm like, yeah, they're adopting our ideas, and that's good for Canadians. So we should be happy for that at least.
Right. At least in the first year of the mandate.
Exactly. I will start complaining a little more after year
Yeah.
year one.
So what's your take on the early look at Carney, a complete new person to Canadian politics? People had literally never heard his name until he went on the Jon Stewart show. Most Canadians had never heard his name, and he went from that to rapidly soaring, becoming the prime minister, and now he's governed for a few months. What are your observations?
Well, my observation would be that number one, he's been very good on the pronouncements, the direction. I think that he's he's done a good job of telling Canadians what he plans to do. I would say that the execution of those plans is probably going to be a little more difficult than he's used to.
Mm.
I suspect that he's going to have some difficulties even within his own government, within his own caucus and cabinet.
Mm.
We saw that in the early days, just as the House was about to come back, where walking into a cabinet meeting, he had ministers kind of all over the map. There was no clear communications plan from the center yet, because you had Gregor Robertson talking about the house prices the value don't have to come down, and then you had Stephen Guilbeault, who's the heritage minister now, talking about there's no need for pipelines, and yet I think his challenges may actually be inside more than
Yeah.
outside. And I don't know if a man with his background and his resume is as completely prepared to manage a caucus of A-type personalities who all have their own opinions and everyone thinks they're right. That's better than most, David. That's probably one of the most important jobs of a prime minister or a leader, managing that group, keeping them fed and watered and happy. It's not an easy job, and I suspect that he may run into some big problems there before too long.
Yeah, it's probably not the thing that brought him into politics.
I guarantee you it's not.
But you would have an interesting insight, because you've been sitting with the Liberal caucus for, I guess, since 2019, so that's 6 years.
Conservative caucus.
No. You've been sitting with the Liberal caucus in the House of Commons.
I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah. I think I'm talking about me personally.
No. You've known the Liberal caucus for 6 years now.
Yeah.
Right. How are they adjusting to having the Catholic hymn book thrown out and replaced with the Baptist hymn book? I mean, the songs, the lyrics, all the songs are different. The lyrics are different. Yeah. It's actually a more pronounced change than I was talking about, because some of the core beliefs systems are different. Like it looks like a different government. Maybe it won't turn out to be, and maybe criticisms are correct that it's the same old, but it looks like a very different government. But the same people there have to give speeches and votes and all that kind of stuff. How are they doing?
Well, we had a brief time there in Ottawa to see how they were handling it for 4 weeks when the House resumed. They were. I talked to everybody, right? And of course, so many of them were really feeling demoralized at the end of the Trudeau era. Even the ones that thought he was amazing were feeling demoralized, and a lot of them thought they were going to lose. So I would say that in the
not enough.
In the early days back, I would say an awful lot of them just looked relieved and just kind of overjoyed that they weren't sent to the dustbin of history. Some of them were a bit cocky too, right? Like, oh, look at and so there's always a bit of that, I guess. But again, it's the honeymoon still, I think, and so in the honeymoon, everything's great. everything's all wonderful. But once the honeymoon's over, as my great grandmother said, you can fall off the clouds of joy and onto the rocks of reality, and we'll see what happens.
um, so how are you gonna comport yourself like in your role as a critic now? You've got a lot of ideas about housing. You care about it a lot. Do you have any relationship with the minister? Do you have any way of having input? Do you see any way in which you're going to be contributing to housing policy in the country?
Yeah, well, listen, I even back 2 years ago when Pierre asked me to do the housing bit, he said, Scott, there's lots to criticize these guys on because they've been a disaster on housing. But he said the situation is bad enough that it's not enough for us just to criticize. We need to be proposing some ideas too, because it's going to take years to solve this problem. And so I really appreciated his approach to that. That's certainly always been my style, having grown up in a consensus building model. And so I like to think that I've struck the balance between criticizing in the House of Commons and challenging, but also proposing ideas. I don't have a relationship with the current minister. I've had a pretty good relationship with all the others I've worked with, but this one I don't know. I think his ego might be a little fragile. I criticized something early on, and then I went to introduce myself to him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I saw you on a video," and then he walked away. So I don't think he enjoyed being criticized. That said, I mean, I have a reasonably good relationship with lots of folks around him. I've actually had a couple of actually really good conversations with the prime minister in the hallway. And on the first day I asked him a question about housing, he didn't answer. Of course, it was, he'd done his few questions and then I was up. And so I saw him in the hallway later and I said, "Oh, you didn't answer my questions." And we kind of chuckled and kibitzed. And I said, "In all seriousness, though, please don't create this other thing. Do this." I said, "It makes no sense. You got to move with more haste." And he said, "Oh, that's an interesting point." And we've chatted a couple times since. I mean, so I think it's important to, I
That's good.
criticize them for this third housing bureaucracy, and I continue to do so. But I also do things like this, David. I guarantee you, all those people making decisions pay attention to what's going on in your show. And I hope that they're listening to this one, where I say, I'm happy to hammer you guys about this stuff. But I'd be a lot happier if you just said, yeah, Aitchison's right, or don't even say that. Just
Mm,
don't do it, you know? So I think it's important to be constructive in your criticism, and that's what I'll continue to do.
right. I would love to have you. Our hour has flown by. I would love to have you back on to talk about the diversity and inclusion side of your
It's no
portfolio.
longer
That's
part of my portfolio.
Oh, okay.
As it turns
Well,
out, I'm just the critic for housing now.
so the intro was wrong.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, I was the minister, and I think the only reason they did that was just to match Ahmed Hussein, who was the Minister of Housing, Diversity, and Infrastructure.
Oh,
But
I
then
see.
when it became Fraser, it was the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure. So
Oh, okay. All
yeah.
right. Well then you're
Anyway,
off the hook. You're off the hook on diversity and
I'm
inclusion.
happy to talk about that anytime, anyhow, though.
All right. What are your plans for the summer?
I'm spending a fair bit of time here in Parry Sound Muskoka. I've got a few trips I've got to do for some housing related stuff out west, some meetings, and I've also done some. I think it's a really big thing, but I've launched something called the Parry Sound Muskoka Community Fund here in Parry Sound Muskoka. As a mayor, I always did a golf tournament and raised money for local charities, and we'd sort of pick and choose which ones we would do. And as the member of parliament, I've done that as well. But um, I just recognize the needs are huge in this community, and we are blessed to have a large population of seasonal residents that come here for a few months, but may not know really what the needs are in the community or may never have been asked. And so this year, my golf tournament, it's called the Scotty. I'm working on getting that going. We're at Big One Island this year. It's in September the 10th, and so we're looking at trying to raise a lot of money for this new fund. We're going to endow this thing and help a wide range of organizations. Parry Sound Muskoka has over 20 food banks and food programs. It's hard to imagine that in a place like this, so small, that there's food banks in little places like, Sundridge and South River. And so, youth mental health, housing, there's all these issues that we deal with here, that, you know, I think we need more resources. And so I'm working to, build this thing and endow this thing with some money to help solve some problems. And so the kickoff to that really will be my tournament. So I'm putting a lot of energy into that.
That's very, very cool. Get
Yeah.
any big names to the golf tournament?
Oh, I can't release that just yet. But
You know, when I
hopefully.
was a child, and when I was a child in Regina, I had a record album, a 33 and a third record album, the opening line of which was, "It's a long way from Perry Sound to Boston."
But Bobby Orr.
You bet. The
I
Bobby
love
Orr
it.
story. Yeah.
I love it. That's great stuff. I've met him a couple of times. He's a lovely, lovely man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trump supporter notwithstanding. Him
No,
and
that's
Jack
okay.
Nicklaus, two people I loved, and now, come on,
What
guys.
are you gonna do?
Yeah. Scott, thank you for taking the time. So great to talk to you.
Thank you for having me, Dave. It's great to be on me there.
Come back when you have something more you want to talk about. We'll always have you. I need to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN, and all you Herle Burly-ites who watch and listen to the show, in addition to, of course, Scott Aitchison and his time. See you next week with more of the Herle Burly.